Hello, 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 everyone. John McCaskill here with Men Talking Mindfulness. This is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. Actually, last week was pretty similar to this, except it was Dr. Clark Chilson sitting with Will, and now he's sitting here with me. He's going to be interviewing me and I guess kind of pulling some of my life story out here. So you guys, as my audience, or our audience rather, can get to know me better. And in all honesty, I'm probably going to pull out some stuff here that I haven't thought about in a long time. So I'm probably going to get to know myself better as well. So Dr. Clark Chilson, he's going to be interviewing us. And just before I hit record, he ran through a few ideas of what we could talk about. And I'm already excited about where this is going to go. So Clark, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here. Great to be here, John. So
I'm
let's just get into
excited
it.
about this. Yeah, let's do it.
When were you born? Where were you born? Tell me a little bit about your earliest days.
Sure. August 19th, 1977 is when I was born, and I was born in Cape Town, South Africa, and I was the fourth of five children, and I was not a huge baby, but not small, and my my mother would say that I had the biggest head, and she says that because she actually ended up losing a lot of blood in the birthing process, to the point where after I was born, they kind of rushed her off and and did a lot of emergency work on her, and she lost enough blood to where her heart stopped. And she remembers hearing the doctor actually saying, "We've lost her," and she did come back. They were revived her. Um, I was going to say obviously, but I guess that's not too obvious. But yeah, I lived with my mother for the rest of our lives. She's still alive now. But yeah, she actually technically, I guess, died on the table there, came back, and she's told me that story a million times over. And then a few years later, 2 years later, 2.5 years later or so, had my younger brother. We lived in Cape Town, South Africa for a few years, and then moved to Johannesburg, South Africa, for a few more, and then moved to the States in 1984. So I was just turned 7 years old when we moved to the States. So I lived most of my childhood in the States, but the first 7 years of it was in South Africa, and it all started right there in Cape Town, South Africa, in 1977.
Do you have any memories of living in South Africa? I mean, you were 7, so you were pretty young.
Yeah, I have a few. We went back in 1987 for the summer vacation, spent 3 months there, and kind of bebopped all around the country. Went to Johannesburg and Pietermaritzburg and Cape Town and Durban and a few other spots, and saw a family that we hadn't seen in 3 years. But in all honesty, I think most of my memories of South Africa are formed by what my parents have told me or pictures that I've seen, and that summer vacation. I don't really remember a whole lot prior to that. I remember bits and pieces, but nothing super significant. Like the most random things pop up in my mind. Like I remember first grade. I'd started first grade before we moved, and I remember, my teacher being upset with me because I refused to color inside the lines of a drawing. And those are the random memories that pop up, but nothing super significant. So yeah, most of my formative memories, formative years are all from Louisiana, where I grew up.
Okay. Okay. So, how many generations was your family in South Africa, and what prompted them to move to Louisiana?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. Because normally, what I get asked when I say that I was born in South Africa is, well, what were your parents doing there? Because you know the perception is that um, the majority of the population there in South Africa is black, and they see me as this white man, and they assume that my white parents were there on some type of mission trip or working for some American company. And it's not at all true. Neither one of those. They were born there. They go back several generations on each side. I want to say 2 or 3 generations on both sides. And then on my dad's side, go back to Scotland, and my mother's side go back to Wales. But what prompted us to leave South Africa? So this was early '80s. South Africa was still practicing apartheid. And for the listeners who don't know what that is, it's basically segregation where the white minority was in control of the country, much like America was in the early part of the 20th century. Anyway, we wanted to get away from that because we didn't believe in it, we didn't support it. And then another aspect of our getting away was my parents now having two young boys. I had three older sisters, and then myself and my younger brother. Um, there was conscription was still being practiced in South Africa. I don't know if it is still today, but it was then. And they felt that as we got older, they didn't want us to be forced into the military. And so one of the things that I joke with my dad about is, well, we left South Africa to get away from the conscription, brought me to the States, and I voluntarily joined the United States military. But yeah, those were some of the big reasons that we got out of there and went back just to visit, but haven't been back really to live since.
Okay, okay. And what was it like growing up in Louisiana? You said you went there when you were 7.
Yeah.
How long were you there for? What was the major city close by?
Yeah. Oh, major city close by. Shreveport, Louisiana is about as major as we get, which is an hour away. I grew up in Ruston, Louisiana, a small town. Basically, Louisiana Tech is what puts Ruston on the map. It's the north central part of the state. I grew up there from when I was 7 until I left and enlisted in the Navy at 19. Um, Went through the schooling system there. And when I first arrived, I had been in first grade in South Africa, came back over to this, came over to the States. Schooling in South Africa is January until December. Those are how the school years are. Came to the States in August, so it's summer vacation, and suddenly I'm on summer vacation. I don't know why I'm not in school, and then I get enrolled in school. I get put in second grade, and because I'd been out of school for a little bit for the summer vacation, it didn't really prepare. I was behind in reading, behind in math, and actually got put back a grade in first grade after about a week or so here in the States. And that was a blessing in disguise. Now I was in first grade and I'd had, now probably 8 months of school. And I was surrounded by other first graders who had only, a few weeks of school. And I think that allowed me to excel. If you've ever read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, I think that's what has kind of set me up for excelling amongst my my fellow first graders, if that's even a thing, excelling amongst first graders. But but yeah, there was also some culture shock, right? I'd gone through 6 or 7 months of school in South Africa. I'd gone through preschool and everything else where it was all white kids. And really the two at the time in South Africa, the two races were either white or black. And that's, white was the folks who, again, the minority running the government, running the schools. So I went to school with all white kids. Came over to the States, and there's a cultural mix, and specifically in the South, there was, black, white, red. There was everything, and I was not used to seeing that. And it wasn't a bad thing. It was just something I wasn't used to, and I'm very glad that that's what I ended up growing up in. I've got black friends, white friends, red friends to this day, and from when I grew up in Louisiana, and also from my time in the military. So yeah, there was that culture shock. But when I use the word shock, I don't want to say it was me walking in there and saying, "Oh my gosh, what are all these other ethnicities doing in here with me?" It was, wow, this is interesting. This is great. And even at that age, it was great to see the mix of cultures and ethnicities in class in
Hmm.
Louisiana. So,
And I suppose you had a different accent,
oh
and you
yeah,
weren't used to Louisiana accents.
yeah,
Did that matter? Like, did kids notice that?
they did very quickly. So again, I've got three older sisters and a younger brother, and my three older sisters, they were of age where people were fascinated with their accent. And here I am as a young boy, first grader, and first graders are fun, but they're also kind of mean. So they made fun of my accent, and they were very again, first graders, so they were naive, and they're like, "Well, how did you get here from South Africa? Did you drive?" This little first grader questions, but they were mean about my accent. So I worked very hard to change my accent to sound Southern pretty early. And now, if you look at my family, it's funny. My three older sisters have stronger accents than I do, and then my younger brother has a stronger accent than I do. Well, which is funny. Well, I think it has to do with two things. One, my brother hadn't really started American school. He was still in kindergarten, so nobody really made fun of him for his accent. And then two, in all honesty, I think I had a greater desire to fit in, whereas my brother was like, "Hey, I'm my own person." My younger brother was, "I'm my own person." My three older sisters were already established with who they are. I wanted to fit in, and so I changed my accent pretty quickly and lost it pretty quickly, and I regret that. Now I pick up a South African accent from across the room. It stands out very easily, but obviously you can tell that I do not have that South African accent at all.
Yeah. 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 So what kind of work did your parents do when you were growing up?
Yeah. So my father is an architect. He's still alive and still works as an architect. Though he's retired, he still draws homes, and he designed the home that my parents live in now.
Mm,
But he was a commercial architect back in the day. Designed a lot of the Dillard's department stores that we shop at the malls and their office buildings. And then my mother, when we were back in South Africa, she was a nurse and a midwife. And then when we came over to the States, her nursing certificates didn't translate exactly. So she did do a lot of midwife work initially, and then finally got to where she could do some work at a local doctor's practice as an RN. But
mm,
that's primarily what they did growing up. My mom spent a lot of time with us, as a working mother and a stay at home mother, and we were blessed for that. I
mm,
honestly don't know how they did that, but with
mm,
five kids
mm.
back in the day, but they did it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what was your upbringing like? What were your parents like in terms of things they emphasized
Mm.
with you and your brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I think my mother um, passively emphasized love. She didn't say, "Hey, you must love," or anything actively, but she just showed such great love for us as children. She showed such great love for us as a family unit. Really, just took care of the family and the household.
Mm,
And my father, I remember him going on business trips and him pulling me aside and saying, "Hey, you're the fourth child, but you're the man of the house,"
mm,
which ties into a lot of what we've discussed in the past about the
mm,
masculinity side. But he also instilled honesty was a huge one. I remember one time we had had some kind of a event in track and cross country, and this was back in the day when that event the next day would be published in the newspaper, and we didn't have a subscription to the local newspaper, so we went to the local grocery store, put 25 cents in, got the newspaper. For those of
mm,
you who are listening who may never have done it, that's how it used to be. Well, I remember going, and I knew there was an article about our track team in this article in this particular publication. I put 25 cents in, which was enough to buy one copy of the newspaper, and I grabbed like six of them, and I walked out, and my dad was like, "What are you doing? I only saw you pay for one of those."
mm,
I was like, "Well, yeah, but you can grab as many as you want once you put a quarter in." And he made me go back and put five more quarters in to pay for the other publications or other copies of that newspaper that I'd gotten.
mm,
But he's also instilled a lot of self reliance. Another story I remember is, and this I've done this exact same thing now as a grown up. He had locked his keys in his car, and he was spending so long trying to get those keys out with like a coat hanger and everything else. And I was like, "Dad, why don't we just call the cops? They can come and open this up." And he's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And then 5 minutes later, "Dad, why don't we just call the cops?" "No." 5 minutes later, "Dad, why?" And he's like, "Son, I'm not going to do that. That's just not who I am. I
mm,
do things on my own." And then, I don't know, 30 years later, and I'm in a parking lot and I'd locked my keys in my car and I'm literally doing the same thing. And one of my buddies just comes over and he's like, "Why don't you call the cops?" And this memory came washing over me. It's like, now I understand why my dad wasn't so was not going to call the cops. So
Mm,
um, I understood it, though. I mean, that sometimes is to our own detriment. We waste a lot of time, but
mm,
it's self reliance and probably a little bit of pride and ego there as well. In
mm,
all
mm.
honesty, but
Yeah.
he taught us self reliance, honesty, integrity, and he's got just a heart of gold. I mean, he wants to help everyone,
Mm,
also to his detriment, to the
mm,
point where he's like, I'm 40 something years old, and he comes over and visits, and it's cold here in Colorado Springs, and I'll step outside with just a sweater on. He's like, "Hey son, do you need a coat?" I'm like, "Dad, I'm a full grown man. I'll
mm,
decide whether I need a coat or not." And I'll step outside. I'm like, "Damn, I should have got that coat." But
yeah.
yeah, he's just got a heart of gold. I love them both. They're my dad turns 80 this year. My mom turns 80 next year, and they're still they're cycling, 20, 30 miles on occasion. They're in incredible shape, and they're an inspiration. They've stayed together this whole time. I'm just beyond blessed to have them as my folks.
Excellent. And so you mentioned running track. That was in high school, I assume.
It
Uh,
was.
what else? What else? What else was high school like? High school
Yeah.
life.
So high school track and cross country were my focus. Academics was secondary, but I still did well, and I think a lot of that really, quite literally, goes back to that first grade, being able to excel and continue to excel through the 12 years I was in school. I was later put in, I don't know, fourth or fifth grade, I was put in the gifted and talented program, and that gave me the ability to continue to study other things that other kids weren't. So I continued to excel academically, athletically. In junior high, I tried football, I tried basketball, I tried baseball. I played them all, for the 2 years in junior high, and then realized that ball sports were not my thing, and running was. Uh, you know, I, I'm I was definitely a lot leaner back then. I weighed maybe 140 pounds, soaking wet, and I was a distance runner, ran track and cross country, and that is really where I put a lot of my effort and focus. Um, didn't have a whole lot of time for girls. I did have one girlfriend in high school, but other than that, I really didn't have a whole lot of time for that. It was primarily focused on sports.
Okay.
Um, I did. We were successful. We had my freshman year. We had an undefeated cross country season and won the state championship. Came back my senior year, won the state championship undefeated in cross country, and then had a record holding in track. Had a record holding 4x800 meter relay team, which actually that relay stood until last year, so 25 years. And I went back just last
Wow.
year to Ruston, Louisiana, where the record had been broken. To literally, and the whole relay team showed up. All four of us from 25 years ago showed up. We took the relay uh, like placard off the record board and literally broke it, and we put the new one up for the new
Nice.
team. So that was a
Excellent.
cool event to be a part of that. So
Nice. Nice.
yeah.
And then after high school, where'd you go? Did you go to work? Did you go to college? What
Um,
happened?
yeah. So in high school, my senior year, I really wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and I put in all my paperwork. I got a congressional nomination. I forget who it was, even who gave me that nomination, but got the nomination. But I actually got turned down. They said my grades were not what they needed to be, and they wanted to see more work in physics and calculus. So I got turned down and decided, you know what, I still want to be in the Navy. My ultimate goal was to be a SEAL, so I enlisted in the Navy,
Mm,
and went off to boot camp in September after my graduation in 1996, and then got picked up the following year from the enlisted ranks. I did some extra studying, took some. I was going to say online courses. They weren't online back then, but I took some extra courses in math, calculus, and physics, and then got admitted to the Naval Academy. Got a Secretary of the Navy nomination, got admitted in the class of 2001. So I went in July of 1997, started there, did my 4 years, and then graduated in 2001 from the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland.
Okay. So you were in the Navy during 9/11.
I was,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
I graduated from Annapolis in May of 2001. Spent that summer training, getting ready to go out to SEAL training buds in Coronado, California, and got out there. It must have been August, and then September 11th, 2001, I was in SEAL training. And I remember very specifically being in the chow hall where we were eating, and we saw it on TV. You know, at this point, you wake up very early on the West Coast, so we were up. And at this point, one tower had been hit, and we saw the second plane hit, and we heard about the Pentagon, and we knew that we were under attack. So they quickly shuffled us back from the chow hall back over to where we do our training. And I remember very distinctly we're standing on the beach, and there's this wooden platform, and one of our instructors jumped up there, and he said, "People are comparing this to Pearl Harbor." Well, I can tell you right now, this this is bigger than Pearl Harbor. We're going to be at war for the next 20 years. And I ran into that same instructor. I literally have not seen that same guy since training until about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I saw him, and I asked him. I was like, "Do you remember jumping on the platform and telling us that we were going to be at war for the next 20 years?" He's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I've never ever wanted to be so wrong in my life." And
Yeah.
yet he was 100% right. We were at war for the next 20 years.
Yeah. 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 And so, how are you still in the SEALs? How long were you in the SEALs for?
I'm not. So I retired from the Navy in August of 2020. Officially, I was pinned a SEAL in February of 2003. So a little more than 17 years as a SEAL.
Okay. Okay. And how do you think that changed you? I mean,
Oof. I certainly wouldn't be practicing mindfulness, or at least I don't think, if it weren't for the SEALs. I had some rough times with it. I lost some good friends on the battlefield, and I personally did things and didn't do things on and off the battlefield that I either wish I hadn't done or wish that I had done, and that caused me a lot of stress and personal anguish to the point where I got pretty sick mentally, and sought some counseling and got introduced to mindfulness and meditation through that.
mm,
So I loved the work we were doing. I loved the people that I worked beside, the men and women. As a matter of fact, I met my wife in the SEAL teams. She worked for me at one of the SEAL teams. Uh, but I love the people, love the mission. But when it gets down to the granular level of what we're doing on the battlefield, or what we're not doing, that really caused me a lot of pain and heartache. And I changed, but ultimately I got help, and I think I've changed for the better. And now I'm able to share what I've learned and help other people through these same journeys or similar journeys. They may be completely different as well. So
mm, mm,
I think I'm better for it
mm,
all around. But it was a tough challenge.
yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about, you said the battlefield, where are we where are we talking about? Where are you talking about?
Yeah,
When were you
sure.
there?
So, in primarily in Afghanistan, I did do one tour in Iraq, but most of my work was in Afghanistan and other areas of the Middle East. But yeah, the when I first got there in April of 2005, um, it was snowing, and then a month later we were on the battlefield doing surveillance and reconnaissance on different targets, doing that reconnaissance on a target, and then providing intel back to the assault team, whether that was our own SEALs or whether it was Green Berets or conventional forces. Um, and then we would do the assaults. Most of those went completely uncontested. When a helicopter lands and a bunch of dudes fly out of the helicopter or climb out of the helicopter, most of the time, the enemy sees that and they realize, hey, we can't fight back. But there were some that were contested, and the battlefield's a scary place. It's all fun and games when you're playing it on some video game, but when it comes to the real thing, it's a lot scarier than a lot of books, a lot of movies, a lot of video games make it out to be. Um, and the real people, their real true selves come out,
Yeah.
um, good and bad.
Yeah.
And you really can't fault anybody for how they come out on the battlefield, because it's tough to prepare for.
And so, how long were you on the battlefield in Afghanistan? So you said you went in April
Yeah,
2000.
so in 2005, I was there for just over 4 months. Um, it was supposed to be longer, and then we ended up having a massive loss, massive loss on the battlefield. Um, we lost 11 SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers in this one mission, and that really changed the deployment cycle and how we were planning to be there. Um, and then I went back for subsequent tours of between 3 and 6 months, um, and to both Afghanistan and Iraq, and other areas of the Middle East. Um, so I guess all in all, maybe 150 missions, something like that on the
Wow.
on the battlefield. Um, Not all of them kinetic, as we call it. A lot of them again were uncontested, but yeah, something like that.
Okay. And you said that being on the battlefield and in that situation, people's true selves come out. I mean,
Yeah.
when you look back at your own experience there, what did you feel came out for you that was your true self that you liked or didn't like?
Yeah. I think a much higher level of fear was in me than I had anticipated. Through training, um, I mean, training is fake. As real as you try to make it, we know it's controlled most of the time. Uh, we don't have a real enemy literally shooting back at us. We have these, the instructors tell us that someone's shooting us, or we have these simulated bombs, simulated explosions, but we know it's all simulated. And then when you get out there in the real world, and you really do have other people shooting back at you, I think my fear level was higher than I had anticipated it being. Um, and I was quite frankly disgusted with myself because of that. Um, but as I spent more time on the battlefield, I got more comfortable, and knowing that was going to come up, knowing that fear was going to come up, and I was able to overcome it. But yeah, I think that's what I was surprised by, was how the real aspect of combat and what happens on the battlefield is completely different than training, no matter how hard you train.
Right, right. Is there anything you wish the American people, particular civilians, knew about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that you feel that we don't know
Mm,
or don't fully
yeah,
appreciate?
yeah, no, I think there's a lot, and especially last year, fast forward 2 months from now, a year ago, when we basically gave up Afghanistan, there were a lot of emotions. My wife and I met at a SEAL team. We deployed together to Afghanistan. She and I both had a lot of emotions, both because of the time that we had spent there, but also because of who we knew, who we had lost over there. So I I wish I don't have a honestly, I don't have a whole lot to say about Iraq. Um, I think we were there for what we thought were good reasons. Um, Whether or not those were fed to us or not, I don't want to get too political on this, but I honestly don't have a whole lot to say about Iraq. Um, Most of my time was in Afghanistan, where I think we were trying to implement some level of governance and, in all honesty, some level or form of democracy. And there were some places that succeeded. Uh, you know, the local little mayors of these towns and villages, they would really, some of them would really embrace this and take it and run with it. But then the culture there in Afghanistan, you travel from one side of the hill to another, and you're dealing with a completely different culture, completely different tribe. You go and you dig a well for one tribe or one little village, and you're tapping into the groundwater. And by doing that, you're taking away groundwater from the village next to you. And it's just this really, it's, I guess what I would like to say is that it's a lot more complex than most people realize. And the reason we as a country had to get out of there, I think, is that it was a puzzle that we were never going to solve, and we were going to sacrifice more blood and resources continuing to try to solve this problem that wasn't ever going to be solved. Um, it's an unfortunate thing because we had already sacrificed a lot of blood and resources to get where we were, and that puzzle completely disintegrated. But yeah, I think at some point you have to realize you're past the point of diminishing returns, and call a spade. And at some point you have to get the hell out. So it's probably not going to be very well received by the audience, but that's my opinion. So
Thank you. And you mentioned your wife. Moving on to more pleasant things now. You mentioned your wife a couple of times that you met in the SEALs, and were you her boss? I mean,
I
how did you meet?
was, yeah, technically. So I was the operations officer at SEAL Team 10, and she was the physician assistant there when we were deployed together. We were deployed to Tarin Kowt, Afghanistan initially for the first half of our deployment. In the second half of our deployment, we were in Shank, and she was responsible for um, taking calls for medical evacuations on the battlefield, and prior to operations, identifying where we could fly people to if they were injured on the battlefield. We call it the golden hour. And so she would map out where we're going, or at this time I'm operations officer. So I didn't actually go out a whole lot. I was more of an administrative and leadership role in the rear, if you will. But she was mapping out the areas where these guys were going and where they could go, because sometimes there were spots where you couldn't get to a medical facility that was within an hour flight, so we just couldn't go there. And she would let us know. But yeah, in a weird way, while we were deployed, she did work for me. And we weren't officially dating until we got back from Afghanistan, and she was no longer working for me. And then we were able to officially date. Though in all honesty, there were some things that happened unofficially before that.
Okay. And how long have you been married now?
We've been married just over 8 years. We
8 years.
actually we got back from that deployment, um, and I told her I told her that I was going to marry her, and she said, "Oh, I know." And I went and bought a ring, and funny enough, went back home to Ruston, Louisiana. And she said, "You know what? I know you have a ring. Don't make a big deal of it. Whenever it feels right, propose." So I had told her before, "I'm going to
Right.
marry you." She said yes, but she still wanted to get asked, but she didn't want to make a big deal of it. So we're back home in Ruston, Louisiana, and we're doing a color run. I don't know if you're familiar with what color runs are. That they kind of have these different colors of powder that they throw all over. You do a 5K, and they throw
Okay.
these different colored powders all over you, and you dress up. And like, I'm wearing a skirt and long
Okay.
socks and a backward ball cap, and I'm covered in this powder from head to toe, and I'm all sorts of different colors. And this race ends right by my high school, where I went to high school. And I went to the back of the car where I had the ring, and I got it, and I got down on my knees, and I proposed in my high school parking lot, covered in this colored powder. So it's a pretty funny story there in and of itself. But yeah, that was a little bit about our proposal, and we've been married since May of 2014. So
Mhm.
we eloped. We didn't have a big marriage. We eloped, and pretty soon after that, I got sent away for a year. I got sent to Bahrain to be
Oh,
an
wow.
executive officer for a year. So that was only about 3 weeks after we got married.
Mm.
So got married. We actually went on a mission trip to Nepal together. Came
Mm.
back, and like 3 days later, I left for Bahrain for a year.
Okay. You say a mission trip. Was this like a religious mission trip or?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
So we're both Christian,
Okay.
and we went to Nepal on a Christian and medical mission trip. So it was me and a whole lot of medical providers, doctors, physicians, dentists, uh, and um, they're like, "So what is your medical training?" I'm like, "Well, got some combat medical training." They're like, "Oh, so you're not afraid of blood?" I was like, "No, blood doesn't scare me." So I worked with the dentist, and what I thought my work with the dentist was going to look like was me handing him what I called tools, and he's
Right.
like, "No, they're not tools; they're instruments."
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to be handing him these instruments, but he's like, "No, no, no, you're actually going to be doing the work." So I
Mm.
literally sat in these little villages up in the hills in Nepal that we had to drive like hours and hours and then hike for hours and hours just to get to these villages. Anyway, I sat on this basket that was flipped upside down, and then I would flip upside down another basket, and my patient would sit on this basket and lean back and put their head in my lap. And
Mm.
then I would give them a shot because there's no filling teeth in the
Right.
mountains in Nepal. So if they
Right.
have a cavity, that tooth is coming out. And
Right.
so I would give them a shot to numb up their mouth. And then I would literally get in there with what looked like a set of pliers and
Right.
rip these teeth out.
Wow.
And I ended up after the few weeks there in Nepal with a full tooth. Because what do you do with these teeth? It's not like
Mm.
you have these little containers that are in the dentist's office that you put teeth in. You put them in a 2 liter Coke bottle.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
ended up with a full 2 liter Coke bottle of teeth. And we
Mm.
ended what do we do with that bottle? It's not like we go and put it in a hazmat
Right.
container.
Right.
We buried it. We buried it in the hills of Nepal, a big bottle of teeth. But that's what
Wow.
I did for a couple of weeks on this mission trip. So we were teaching what we believe in our faith, and then also doing medical work for them.
Okay. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
So you've been married 8 years. That's a while. It's more than a few days. What have you learned
Mm.
from married from being married?
Whew. I've learned a lot. I don't know, that could be another whole season of episodes, I think, but I'll try to keep it short. What I've learned is, communication is huge. Um, Expectations, set those expectations aside because nobody is ever going to meet expectations, and you are not ever going to meet somebody else's expectations. So I think communication is huge, and then setting aside your expectations. They're their own person. The other person in the marriage is their own person, and you can't mold them to be what you want them to be. Now, I am blessed in that my beautiful bride and who she wants to be
Mm.
is exactly who I want her to be. She's a wonderful person, and she's got like I was talking about my mom and my father earlier. She's just got a heart of service that just won't quit, and I am so blessed to have her as a partner.
Nice, nice. And do you guys have kids?
We do. We have three young kids: a
Oh,
5-year-old little girl, a 3-year-old little boy, and then a 1-year-old, a 13-month-old little girl.
okay. And being a father, I mean, do you have any thoughts on fatherhood and how you want to raise
Mm,
your children?
yeah. Well, I had thoughts on fatherhood, and then becoming a father changed those thoughts. I remember. So I've got three older sisters, as I mentioned before, and they all had kids. And I remember before I had kids, I would give them a lot of unsolicited advice about how they should be raising their kids and what they should do differently. And then God had a way of humbling me and giving me my own kids. And now I realize that everything that I said way off. Fatherhood is unbelievably rewarding, but also unbelievably tough. I had no idea how hard parenthood, not just fatherhood, would be. Um, I've had some of the best times of my life with my children. I was able to actually catch all three of them as they were born, and those were, life changing moments, and then since then have been many life changing moments. My 5 year old now, when she was 6 months old, went in for a major surgery, had what was thought to be a massive tumor in her liver cut out. We had to go to Boston Children's Hospital for that. Ended up not being a tumor; it was an intestinal duplication about the size of a grapefruit. She had 5/8 of her liver cut out and her gallbladder. And I will tell you, the 9 hours that my wife and I spent on the waiting room floor was probably the scariest 9 hours of my life, much more so than the battlefield,
Mhm.
just because you're so helpless. And I
Right.
think that translates to uh, your original question: what do you know, or what do you feel about fatherhood? There's a lot of times you feel helpless. Like, again, your expectations of what these kids are going to do, and then they're their own little person and they do something completely different. Plus, their brains and minds aren't fully formed, so they don't fully understand. And as an adult, that can be frustrating. You're like, hey, I want you to come over here and get dressed into your school clothes, but they don't do it. I mean, this is just a small anecdote. This literally happened this morning. I'm trying to get my 3 year old to come over and change, and he's running around the house like, no, I've got to go to work. Like, but it's also such a blessing when I get home from work and he runs up and hugs my leg, and he says, hold me, and I lift him up and hold him, and it's awesome. It's awesome. I love it. I love being a dad. I love it. So
Well, John, I wish we had a lot more time, but we only have a couple more minutes. So I wanna end by giving you a moment to kind of reflect on your life and like share with us one or two things that you feel grateful for uh, in your 44 years that you've
yeah.
been here.
Oh wow. So man, one or two things. Um, I'm very, very thankful for my beautiful wife, and when I say beautiful, I mean inside and out. I'm just unbelievably blessed to have her as the partner in my life, partner in my life as my bride, partner in my life as the mother of my children. Uh, yeah, I would absolutely be remiss if I didn't start there.
Mm,
Um, my parents, I think they gave us the five children a phenomenal childhood. It was not perfect, but it was great. We learned a ton through it, and I think we're all really good, strong, loving people because of it. Um, my beautiful children, I, I'm learning as much as they are from me. I'm learning from them as much as they are from me. And then, great friends like Will. I mean, doing this podcast with Will, I truly feel like he's a brother of mine, and I can share anything with him. Some of the other people that we've had on the show, and guests and people that we work with, those are all blessings. And then, in all honesty, I have my health. I have a roof over my head. So I'm very thankful for that. So I
yeah.
think that's where I'll leave it.
All right. Excellent, John. Well, thank you.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Clark. You've been a phenomenal interviewer and host of our show. So I very much appreciate you. And this has been a lot of fun. And in all honesty, it's been eye opening for me. So thank you for the very thoughtful questions and your time.
Great. Great.
And for the audience, thank you for listening. I hope this has been fun for you. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Jon, Jon, at mentalkingmindfulness.com. And until next time, peace.